Well, good morning to you all. At least it's morning here in the Midwest. It's very warm. My air conditioner is broken. I have the fan running, so if you hear a little white noise in the background, it's my fan running. But I'm Cass, C-A-S-S, Terry, T-E-R-R-Y, and I'm here to tell you a story of the last 4 or 5 years of my life. I'm going to put this in a little ebook, and so I've entitled it Rich Doctor to Really Poor Doctor, Losing My Virginity by Cass Terry. I'm going to tell you how I went from a MD, PhD, PharmD, MBA to an almost penniless doctor and pharmacist. It's taken me a long time, over 2.5 years, to gather the strength and courage to put my story out for anyone to hear. And it's been liberating for me to write my script, and it's also liberating for me to make this video. I remember the analogy was like when you have to say something and it's inside of your fist and you're clenched and you just got to get it out. You have to get that out. So when you do, you release it, you feel invigorated, and you rid yourself of that burden of carrying it around in your own brain. So I'm opening my heart and I'm opening my brain to all of those who care to watch it. So let's get on. I apologize for using part of Richard Branson's book in the title. I did it for humor. And as the comedian Michael Jr. says, laughter is the tangible evidence of hope. That's why you'll see my dry humor sprinkled throughout this post, or this video. So I'm going to start out. I've got it in chapters. It's a little bit long, and I apologize for that, but it's a long story. So chapter 1, how did this happen? Well, I personally believe that a lot of the controversy had to do with growth hormone and other anti-aging hormones. You see, my PhD research was on growth hormone in the brain. It made me a rock star in the quote-unquote anti-aging field, at least at one point in time. And with that success came many things, including large crowds of admirers, many talks nationally and internationally, including travel and giving talks at workshops, many perks to go with it. So let's jump down to chapter 2 here, because I got to move on. I call that ego dollars, EGO dollars. I received many offers, and I took some of them, even though I was still employed by the medical school as a professor of neurology and chairman of the department, actually. Of course, they found out, and I was ordered to, they being the medical school, to cease that activity. Of course, I didn't, so I left the medical school not knowing where I would end up for certain. And that begins my long journey. So chapter 3 is called Disintegration of My Marriage. My wife was horribly upset with me for giving up my career as an academic neurologist. And you know what? And I don't blame her. Plus, my extensive traveling even made our marital situation even worse. I knew I was losing her respect because of the people that I was hanging with. She didn't like them. My son didn't like them. My family didn't. Nobody liked them. I did, but nobody else in my family. No matter. I still did hang out with them. And then let's swing over to chapter 4. It's called Goodbye Medical School. Adios, Michael E. Michael. There was a dean at that time by the name of Mike, first name Michael, and the president's first name was Michael. So I called it the Mike and Mike Show. After I left, I opened up an office, did legal work as an expert witness in malpractice and personal injury cases as well as some workers' comp cases. I never advertised. I became very successful, making money in the preferred six-figure range. Life was good, but very stressful. I had to testify in court many times, and I usually won. Not bragging, but I did. It's on the record. The juries liked me because I spoke their language, rather than some stuffy-ass doctor up there speaking to himself, which made their eyes glass over and they'd fall asleep. That didn't happen to me, at least very often. And so, let's go to Chapter 5. I entitled that chapter, The Hormone Doctor. I was taking growth hormone and testosterone myself to keep my blood levels in the high normal range. I was trying to look as quote-unquote youthful as possible. So thinking back on it, I think the hormones that I took changed my personality in a way that was much different than it used to be. I wasn't overdosing, however. It was the same goal that I had with my patients, my older patients. Not too much, but enough to keep people in the upper third of the normal range in the normal range. I mean, after all, who wants to be in the bottom third? They'd rather be in the top third, right? So that was my goal. By the way, in case you're wondering, I never prescribed hormones for athletes of any sport, weightlifters, or anyone under the age of 50 years old. So my interest in hormones was basically aging, nothing to do with enhancement of physical performance. As we see in the press nowadays, there's several people who've got burr under their saddle for this subject, and they just keep pushing it and pushing it. And I don't disagree with some of the things they're doing, but they don't know the difference between growth hormone and an anabolic steroid. They don't know that growth hormone is not the same as testosterone. They have totally different effects, but so be it. That's the way it is. So Chapter 6, What Happens in Vegas, is what I entitled this chapter. Well, I was sitting in my office one day. I got a phone call from a couple gentlemen, and they had a company called Cenegenics, Cenegenics. It was located in Las Vegas. They lived in Chicago, but they were starting the company in Las Vegas, and they were going to be picking up and moving out there, which they did do. And I was their first medical director. Now, I didn't pick up and leave and go to Vegas. I went there as a consultant about 1 week a month for several months. Never gambled, but I did love Vegas. The shows were good and the food was good, and it was fun. It's like another Hollywood. The goal of Cenegenics was treating people who were aging with diet, exercise, vitamins, and hormones. They market now all over the country, at least the U.S. They're actually on their ads. You'll see them in magazines. There's a picture of an older doctor. His name is Dr. Life, L-I-F-E, I believe. He has a good-looking abdominal six-pack. He's really buffed, and he's on the cover. He's like the poster boy for him. He's a doctor there, a real doctor at Cenegenics in Las Vegas. So what happened in Miami did not stay in Miami or under the fornices, F-O-R-N-I-C-E-S, is what I entitled this chapter. Now, what did I use under the fornices in there? Well, I'll tell you why. Briefly. The fornices mean arches. Fornix is an arch, and fornices is the plural, which means arches. And so the word fornicator, as we all have heard, I'm sure, meant, and it was derived from, I think it was from ancient Rome. Excuse me, my nose is itching here. And I'm not lying. In Rome, the ladies of the night used to stay under the arches of the buildings in Rome and other countries because they stayed dry and they looked more appealing to their clients. They were called fornicators at that time. So the word fornicator comes from fornix, or under the arch. That's what it means. Later on, I was asked to join a company in Miami called Nexos Therapeuticals. Nexosterapeuticals. Nexos Therapeuticals. The owner was a man who went by the name of Arthur Shinitsky. 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 We agreed upon a 40% share for me of all sales. This was done, I went to Miami, met with Arthur and his Colombian girlfriend, and after a while we decided that was going to be the sign. I wrote the material for the website and also did phone consultations. I only did education and no selling. So I wrote the website, the medical part of it, and the educational part. I thought it was all good and legal. It sounded good to me, and Mr. Shinitsky told me that he had his attorney do his research and due diligence, and we were given the green light to go ahead and do this. So we would administer hormones to both men and women in the aging category, not to anybody else, I thought, but later on that was not true. It became very successful. I was making a fair amount of money there, in the 5 figures every month. Not a lot, but by some standards, but for me it was. So that was on top of my legal work, which I was also doing. That was bringing me in the 6 figures per year. It became very successful. I was making a nice amount on top of all of those things. Things were good, I thought. I made another big mistake by not doing enough due diligence on Mr. Shinitsky. He was forging my name on prescriptions and selling growth hormone and anabolic steroids to all sorts of people I did not know about. Mr. Shinitsky told me his company was paying all the taxes, including my taxes. Excuse me for a second. I get a Kleenex here. So I thought, well, okay, that's good. Little did I realize that I had just given up my virginity. That's therefore where that word comes from in this story. And let's go on. Well, chapter 8. It's called The British Are Coming. The British are coming. Here come the feds, the IRS, the DEA, and the FBI, and other groups all at once on me. Well, then and the reason is somebody filed a claim against the Miami company called Nexos Therapeuticals, and I found out my name was forged by Mr. Shinitsky on prescriptions, which were issued for what they call stacking, like stacking up anabolic steroids. It's an old weightlifter's trick. The claim was actually filed in Connecticut. Well, about the same time I got a subpoena to appear to federal grand jury investigation in Connecticut. What a coincidence, eh? And just before that subpoena, I got an unannounced home visit from 2 very nice, quote-unquote, DEA agents driving a big black Suburban. There was trademark. Another coincidence? Really? I had received an audit from the IRS just prior to that time. Just, an audit. Regular audit. After I got back from Connecticut, around that time, my audit had turned into not just an audit, but a criminal investigation with the IRS. So now I was being investigated by the criminal division of the Internal Revenue Service. Another coincidence? What's going on here? I said. Well, chapter 9. After I call it, how did I miss that fact? After I hired lawyers and special investigators, we found out that Arthur Shanitsky, I can't put it any other way, was a crook. And he had spent 5 years behind bars in a federal penitentiary, get this, for billing Medicare with social security numbers of dead people. Of dead people. Is that outrageous or what? Chapter 10. Hola, Juan Valdez. Guess what? Mr. Shanitsky and his Colombian girlfriend, I think it may have been his fiancée at that time, disappeared and ended up at her uncle's coffee bean ranch in Colombia. I don't know if his name was Juan Valdez, but that's where they ended up. He stayed there, both he and his girlfriend, Anna, stayed there for several months without any communication, excuse me, to me. Later on he told me he was ill, and that's why he went to Colombia on doctor's orders. Well, bueno. Mentirosos siempre mienten. Liars always lie. Chapter 10. The subject of interest. So now I was undergoing a criminal investigation by the IRS, and the subject of interest, quote unquote, in a federal grand jury investigation. I didn't know what to do, really, except hang on and pray. And at that time, all I could think of was the Joshua prayer. And it's from Joshua chapter 1, verse 9, in the New International Bible Interpretation. Here it is. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Don't be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. That passage kept me going. Really. So, chapter 11. Excuse me. I still have some emotion attached to that. So, chapter 11. Goodbye meal ticket number 1. Okay. You can imagine what happened when the humane and unselfish federal attorney, his name was Mel Johnson, he released everything to the local newspaper, which was and is circulated throughout the state. It even talked about a Porsche Cayenne that I used to own, as if there was something wrong with that. I don't know. I guess they thought it was. You know what? And then my attorney, Nathan, I won't tell you his last name. Unfortunately, he had severe illness and is no longer with us. God rest his soul. My attorney told me not to take this personally. Well, this was a death knell for my legal work, as loss of income, as well as loss of income from Miami. So I had now no money coming in, and a truckload full of lawyer's bills, of course. How could I not take this personally? I don't know. So now I was, as they call it, a po-ho whore, or po little buttercup, if you like Gilbert and Sullivan. And I'm not referring to the Po River in Italy, although I did feel I was going to be dumped into the Adriatic Sea at that time. The Urban Dictionary states I was so po, I couldn't afford the second half of the word. Well, that was me, my friends. So, chapter 12. What happened to the wheels of justice? Or throw Papa off the train. The next thing that happened is that the grand jury drops their investigation, and it appeared to me and others that Arthur Shanitsky threw me under the bus, so he wouldn't get put back in jail for what he did in Miami, for the taxes, and by lying about his shady activities. What else would a pimp do? Another Spanish quotation. ¿Qué más un mentiroso y un ladrón hacer? He had been in jail twice before. Why wouldn't he lie again? Anyway, chapter 13. An unlucky chapter, but my day in court. My day in court. Never forget that day. I can tell you who was sitting in the back, in the gallery, including my family, minus my wife, ex-wife. Well, she was still my wife at that time, but we weren't living together. My daughter, who was crying with her kids, and my son. They both had to testify on my behalf. So I'm left hanging with a family who's crying and a bunch of friends who are crying. What am I going to do? I'm sitting there, I'm looking at the judge in this big courtroom with the imprimatur of the federal government on it. I plead guilty to the tax charge, the tax fraud charge. There was no other choice. I had to tell the truth. And you know what? I signed the tax return myself. What could I do? That's hard to defend. So I end up with a felony conviction. It's a non-violent felony, but still, it's a felony is a felony, no matter how you look at it. And believe me, my friends, guys and gals, it's something you don't ever want to have. Believe me. So I'm sentenced now. Now, Mr. Mel Johnson, the prosecuting attorney, was trying to get me thrown in the federal penitentiary. That was my greatest fear. I lost many nights of sleep, wondering if I was going to be behind bars. It's not a good feeling. So, I had to read my statement and my apology to the judge. My son spoke, and he did a great job. My daughter spoke on my behalf, and I had about 20 testimonials, mostly from attorneys I had worked for, saying that I was a pretty good guy. I was very honest, more than most witnesses that testify for them. But maybe that helped me. I think it did, because I have sentenced to 6 months of house arrest. I wore an ankle bracelet for 6 months, 24/7. I was given 3 years probation with 150 hours of community service. That was my sentence. It could have been worse. It could have been up to Oxford University, which is a federal penitentiary for white-collar crime up in northern Wisconsin, close to Madison. Fortunately, I avoided that. So I actually liked the community service, and I'm still doing it. Even though I don't have to do it anymore, I've more than surpassed 150 hours. I'm about 400 now. My probation ends very soon. And so that's the name of that story. So, chapter 14, say goodbye to your spouse and your money, Cass. Well, okay, bye-bye. My wife decided finally to file for divorce against me. We divorced after 45 years of marriage. 2 beautiful children, 4 beautiful grandchildren. That took the rest of my cash for that, because I had to pay an attorney. As it turned out, I had to pay her attorney's cost to her, which is kind of ironic because she was filing suit against me. But anyway, who knows how the wheels of justice and the balance of the justice tilts one way or the other. Chapter 15. Mikasa no es mi casa ya. My beautiful old house for 20 years. It was appraised for 7 figures, a little over $1 million. I had to sell it because I couldn't afford the mortgage and the real estate taxes now. My legal business had been turned off totally because once the conviction hit the market, the newspaper, there were only a few lawyers that would even talk to me. Some were actually very angry with me. So I put the house on the market, and I thought, oh, this should sell. It's a great house. It's in the high end, but it should sell. So then what happens? The floods came, the torrential floods. It was like a river flowing down the front street where the house was. It filled my basement with water. I took it off the market because I couldn't have buyers coming through seeing that. The only way my buyers would have been able to see the basement was in full-length waders or paddling a kayak through my basement. And I didn't have any kayaks there, or waders. So I had to take the house off the market. There was about $80,000 worth of damage by the time it was repaired. December rolled around and the market was dead. Deader than a doornail. So what happened? Nobody came to look at it. The inevitable, well, they did, some people did, but they offered me such lowball offers I was insulted by it. Thinking back, I probably should have accepted the highest one, but I didn't. So the inevitable happened, and it was inevitable that my house went into foreclosure. Here's this $1 million house built in 1929 being foreclosed upon. Ironically, the house used to be owned by a judge. So I lost the house and all the memories that went with it. And you can take that to the bank. Here's the irony. One of the ironies. One of the lawyers at the firm that defended me, the firm is called White, Hirschbeck, and Dudek. They defended me against, Nathan worked for them. They defended me against the IRS. One of the attorneys at that firm bought my house for half of what it was worth after it was foreclosed upon by who I call the Sheriff of Nottingham. And to quote Beretta or Robert Blake aficionados, that's the name of that tune. I won't say anything more about that. So, Chapter 16, thank the U.S. courts for Chapter 7. That's the only thanks I have to the U.S. court system right now. No choice, I had to declare bankruptcy. I won't go through that. It was relatively painless. Chapter 17. Adios, meal ticket number 2. So once all the states were informed of my felony conviction, which I had to do, all but one, which is my home state of Wisconsin, asked me to relinquish my license because of the felony conviction. It had nothing to do with my practice of medicine, just bad luck, amigo. Too bad. Well, don't take it personally, Cass. Okay. Well, it had nothing to do with my practice. It just had to do with the felony conviction. So after all this, Chapter 18. What about Doc T? That's what I used to go by, Doc T, Dr. Terry. Hey, Doc T, they used to call me. Is he doing okay? Well, I had psychologists and psychiatrists. That gave me somebody to talk to, which did have some value. That's about all. I was prescribed antidepressants, of course. They didn't do much for me. They had side effects. So I stopped them. They ruined my Thanksgiving, bastards, because I started taking them right before I prepared a Thanksgiving dinner for my daughter at her house. And then the shrinks kept asking me if I had any suicidal thoughts. I said no, I never gave up the ship. So let's go to chapter 19, the church. Alleluia, alleluia. Alleluia means praise Jehovah in Hebrew, and it meant praise Jehovah, or now it means the Christian church, praise the Lord, the Messiah. And we go back to the Joshua prayer. Still using that every day, folks. Guys and gals, that got me through this. Not without scars, but it got me through it. So, Joshua, book 1, chapter 1, verse 9. I'm quoting, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." And I think he was. At least in most places. So, after I was sentenced, I thought, I gotta have some more support in my life here. I gotta figure out where the heck I'm going. What happened? So, I became a born-again Christian. After spending hours with the pastor, he had a bigger book collection than I do. But I thank the Lord for his church, it's called the Church in the City in Milwaukee, and the pastor is Dave Duncan. Not only did those two things save my life, more importantly, they saved my soul. Really. And at the entrance to that church in the city, there is a street sign, and I don't have a picture of it now, but I put this on the computer just so you can see. So the street sign had an arrow pointing inside. It says, "Sinners only." Very similar to this. This church is for sinners only. You see that? Let me pull it back. This church is for sinners only. That was my church. And we're all sinners, so everybody can come to church. Then I thought about the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector from Luke 18 verses 9 through 14. I'll just read parts of it. The Pharisee, who was the higher up of the Jews, a high position, stood by himself and prayed, "God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even this tax collector who was right next to him. I fast twice a week, and I tithe 1/10 of all I get." But the tax collector stood at a distance from the Pharisee, and he would not even look up at the heavens, but he would beat his breast and say, "God have mercy on me, a sinner." Verse 14 says, "I tell you, this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all of those who exalt themselves will be humbled," i.e. the Pharisee. "Those who humble themselves will be exalted," i.e. the tax collector. You know, tax collectors, there's a long history behind them in the Bible. Tax collectors, because of their association with the hated Roman Empire, were seen as traitors to Israel, and they were loathed and treated as outcasts, which is not too bad. This man's posture spoke of his unworthiness before God. Unable to even lift his eyes to heaven, the burden of his guilt and shame weighed heavily on him. and the load he carried had become unbearable. I wish more tax collectors were like that. You know, tax collectors are often portrayed in fiction as being evil. In the modern world, they share a similar stereotype with that of the lawyers. Tax collectors were also known as publicans, Publicans. They're mentioned many times in the Bible, mainly in the New Testament. They were working for tax farmers, known more recently as the Internal Revenue Service. The tax farmers and the Internal Revenue Service, or the IRS, are the same thing. They are generally described as being greedy and taking more money than they are entitled to. And of course, if you look at recent events and some of the boondoggles they went on, including the guy in the hot tub with the two, I'm looking at that picture right now, sitting with 2 drinks by his side. So, forget about the psychologist and the psychiatrist. And my apologies to my son and daughter-in-law, who are excellent they're both psychologists. So chapter 20. At the end, folks, angels descend upon my house. Well, my son and his wife and their friends rescued me and moved me to his hometown, where he lives with his wife and one of my grandchildren. I'll always be thankful to those that pitched in and helped tremendously, including my son and his wife, Annette and Lynn and Joe, Stephanie and Corey, and Marie and Dale, and one of the son-in-laws of Marie and Dale. My daughter has 3 children, so some of the good news is I have 4 grandchildren. My daughter helped out tremendously, coming from Chicago every week, once a day, to help me get rid of stuff from my old house. She's a great gal. So, finally, the epilogue. Since my move, only minor, quote-unquote, things have happened. Like, here are some examples: getting my car repossessed. My little 2008 Toyota Camry. They repossessed it because I missed a couple car payments. Well, I couldn't afford them, but I got it back, primarily because my daughter loaned me the money. Almost getting my utility bills and water shut down twice. Actually, the truck was in the driveway at one time. And then a threat of getting evicted from my rental house because I couldn't pay the rent on 1 month. You know, my cell phone was turned off too many times to count. I had 15 overdrafts in 1 month, each for $34 in my checking account. I paid over $1,000 in overdraft fees in the last 6 months. My 2 children rescued me financially from some of those nightmares. And guess what? Here's the lowest of the low. Stealing lawnmower gas from my car. My son used to loan me his lawnmower, and he would bring one of those big red containers over, full of gas for the lawnmower, and I would put most of it in my car because I couldn't afford to put any gas in my car. And then I used to break open the piggy bank to buy food for my 2 doggies. I have 2 English setters. They're my friends, my good friends. Now, as the Urban Dictionary goes, man, that is pole. I was pole. But I made it. I always will have more humility than I ever guessed I would have. I didn't regain my virginity, if there is such a thing, but I am reborn. You know what, just to close, I don't tell this story for a pity party or by any means, and I don't think I am a victim by any means. I tell it because you have to see what can happen to you if you don't take care of your business and follow up on everything. The devil is in the details, guys and gals. My friends, don't believe everything you hear and see. I can tell you that. Even though you may live with the concept of trusting everyone, like I did, don't be stupidly naive, like I was. I'm not selling anything, I'm just telling everything. Does my story remind you a little bit of Les Miserables? You remember that story? The man who stole a piece of bread and he was ostracized, persecuted for years. Well, that's a little bit like the way I feel. But that's my story, guys and gals, and it'll be the last time I tell it, but it'll be out there if anybody's interested in it. If I bored you, I'm sorry, but at least you know who Cass Terry is. And for those of you who wonder about me, all you got to do is look at this video. Thank you very much for listening. For those of you who stayed to listen.